The reality is that it's clear that the leadership in Israel, past and present, and probably future, that they don't care about the American people any more than they care about the Palestinians, right? We're all just grasshoppers to them.
Why are these our wars? Why are Israel's endless problems America's liabilities? Why are we in the National Conservative bloc, broadly speaking, why do we laugh out of the room this argument when it's advanced by Volodymyr Zelensky, but are slavish hypocrites for Benjamin Netanyahu? Why should we accept America first, asterisk, Israel? And the answer is we shouldn't.
The conservative divide over what it means to be America first was on full display this week at the annual National Conservatism Conference. And the guy that you just watched is named Kurt Mills. He's the editor and executive director of the American Conservative, who went up against interventionist Max Abrams, an assistant professor of political science at Northeastern University. Now, the two butted heads over America's unconditional support for Israel and Donald Trump's decision to drag the United States even deeper into Middle East conflicts. Now, here's how Kelly Vlalos, who is over at Responsible Statecraft, summed up the debate. Abrams came out swinging to call all realists today, by the way, I personally identify as a realist, but all realists today, especially John Mearsheimer, wrong on the issue of Iran and the Middle East writ large. In fact, he called them all MAGA isolationist realists who have become insane in their wrong-headed analysis since being right on the failures of the post 9/11 wars. Now, Abrams also referred to Trump's bombing of Iran as successful and argued that the isolationists said any American intervention in Iran would be just like the Iraq War. They said that Trump and DNI Tulsi Gabbard were lying or at the very least totally wrong about Iran's nuclear weapons capability, that the US had no strategic interest in Iran, that Trump is some kind of a weak snowflake who can't ever stand up to Israel, that he'll only intervene due to Israeli pressure against his own volition, and that Israel may well deliberately kill Americans all over the Persian Gulf in a series of false flag operations. Now, this is some really insane stuff. This is some really crazy stuff. It's probably the most inaccurate Mideast punditry that you can find anywhere. Now, Abrams also accused his anti-interventionist foes of being paid mouthpieces for George Soros and the Kochs. And honestly, I think that's a pretty ridiculous thing to say when you know what's happened with USS Liberty or with the Beirut bombing in 1983. In fact, Scott Horton briefly weighed in on what Mossad likely knew before the Beirut bombing even happened. This was on Piers Morgan's show.
In Victor Ostrovsky's book, By Way of Deception, he says that the Mossad knew that Hezbollah, or I guess proto-Hezbollah at that time, was making a giant truck bomb and decided explicitly not to warn the Americans before the Beirut attack that killed 241 American Marines in 1983. I have to wonder if that's why Ronald Reagan went ahead and pulled out at that time instead of doubling down. It's because he knew of their treachery. That's again in the book By Way of Deception. And it just goes to highlight the vast daylight and discrepancy between the interests of the nation state of Israel, which, as the gentleman said, of course, they're a very small nation state. It's in their interest, obviously, to get America to do what they want.
So, Scott, I did not know about what you had revealed on Piers Morgan's show at all. And I want to just kind of pause and have you elaborate on that a little more, because I think that Americans, maybe it's because of the kind of public school education we received. Our textbooks were published by Robert Maxwell, who was the head of two publishing houses here, Macmillan and McGraw-Hill. Those two publishing houses published the textbooks that our students read in public schools. So these types of, what you revealed is not something that the typical American ever hears about. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I really should try to interview this guy. I think he's still around. He's a former Mossad spy, last I heard living in exile in Canada. And he wrote this book by way of deception, which that's the slogan of the Israeli Mossad: by way of deception, thou shalt do war. And which I don't know what the origin of that is, but anyway, that's their slogan, and that's the book. And he says in there that they knew, as I said in that clip there, they knew that this group of Shiite fighters were making a truck bomb, and they knew that there was only 1 or 2 targets available. There were only 1 or 2 targets that were the potential targets for this thing. There had already been a couple of truck bombs back and forth at that point. And then, so it was brought up, well, we better tell the Americans. And he has quotes, which it's a single source, but his quotes are that they said, well, that's what they get for sticking their nose into our business. And I forget the other one was, I forget, I don't want to say what the second one was because I forget, but that was what they get. That's what they get for sticking their noses in, was one of them. And there was a second quote too, being dismissive. It may have been just the Americans. It's up to them to take care of themselves. We don't owe them anything, something like that.
So if
and then
real quick,
they cite that to this day. This is why we have to hate the Shiites and the Iranians to this day, is because of that bombing in 1983. Even if Ronald Reagan sold them missiles a year and a half after that,
That's incredible. And just for anyone who doesn't know the context, so we had a US peacekeeping mission, and the whole point was to just kind of prevent an ongoing war with the Israelis. And I guess that's what Israel was salty about. And they didn't tell us that our soldiers, that hundreds of Americans were under threat from a potential Hezbollah bombing in Beirut.
Yeah. Wow. Look, the reality is that it's clear that the leadership in Israel, past and present, and probably future, that they don't care about the American people any more than they care about the Palestinians, right? We're all just grasshoppers to them. And so if they got to sink our Navy ship or try to, if they got to, refuse to share all that they know about the hijackers hiding in Florida, or if they got to, keep it under their hat that there's about to be a truck bombing against our Marines in Beirut or whatever it is, if it's in their interest in the short term. And this is actually always very surprising to me, in fact, because you could obviously argue that this is not in their interest to treat the American people like, we're absolutely just cattle, on their ranch. What if we start to resent that and refuse to pay their way and fight their wars anymore? So you can see why things like this might be in their interest in the short term, but then they do things that end up leading to a lot of resentment against them, and which from their point of view, you would think would jeopardize their interest for the medium and the long term. But, politicians tend to think in very short cycles, I guess.
Yeah, well, I want to get back to the conference and the response to all of these allegations, toward the isolationists. Because, look, like, what about Mills? Okay, like, how did he respond? Well, according to the reporting, Mills quickly pointed out that there was a deal with Iran on the table, and Trump could have achieved much more and without bloodshed if he had let the negotiations go on and had not gotten sucked into the vortex of Israel and its supporters in Washington who so desperately wanted to bomb Iran. And here's a little gem from Mills on the power Israel has exerted over the United States.
Why have I become a hater and utterly convinced that the US-Israel relationship, particularly when Republicans hold national power, has become a world historical, perhaps the world historical case of the tail wagging the dog? As former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, as mentioned by Max, a longtime source of mine, as well as that of the most fun journalists in this town, has taken to labeling the dynamic, Israel is a vassal state calling the shots in the world's most powerful empire, and regime change in Tel Aviv, his words, not mine, is necessary.
Finally, Mills chided the Trump administration's crackdown on critics of Israel's genocide under the guise of preventing anti-Semitism, saying one could be forgiven for believing the only people this administration is reliably deporting are supporters of the Palestinian cause after riding back into power on the appeal of free speech enshrined in the First Amendment of this country's constitution. If conserving that isn't conservatism, I don't know what is. This administration has used its influence to attempt to curb and intimidate speech on Middle East issues, particularly the State Department. After assembling and potentially generationally realigning a cohort of voters disgusted with woke pieties and suffocation of dialogue with incessant accusations of racism, Republicans have all too eagerly embraced holding the whip themselves, accusing countless critics as anti-Semites instead of engaging on the issue. And what makes this particular debate even more interesting is NatCon, which hosted the event, of course, was launched back in 2019 by a guy named Yoram Hazony, a staunch pro-Israel nationalist. Historically, this event has avoided foreign policy discussions, but this year there were luckily 2 sessions featuring anti-war voices. As for the reception, well, Kelly Vlalos reports that the questions from the audience were 90% sympathetic to Mills, but that there was some audible support when Abrams said that Palestine cannot be given a state. And even though we're hearing from more and more anti-war voices on the right, and that's a good thing, unfortunately it does appear that most Republicans are still in Israel's corner when it comes to the genocide in Gaza. So take a look at this chart. It shows that a July Gallup poll found 71% of Republicans say they approve of Israel's action in Gaza. And I'm curious about that, Dave, because honestly, I've been hearing from so many high-profile people on the right who identify as right-wingers, who are pushing back against, the Trump administration's foreign policy. I don't know if that polling's accurate, but I am curious what your feel of the situation is.
There's no question that something major is happening on the grassroots level of the right wing in America, and this is a good example of it. I was at a Turning Point USA event a couple months back, and I did a debate there moderated by Charlie Kirk, and it was certainly a divided crowd. But I mean, like twice as much of the portion of the crowd that agreed with me was twice as big as the one that disagreed with me. And I know Charlie Kirk put out a poll after that, and I won the poll. And this is Charlie Kirk's event, like of all places you would think would be a pro-Israel space. And I certainly have seen a lot of polling with the young people, young right-wingers. There's been a massive shift in terms of supporting Israel. And I think a lot of it is like even like Max Abrams' points are just all so ridiculous. And he can try to point to like, oh, okay, there's some conspiracy theorists who think Israel might launch a false flag or something. But the bottom line, it's funny, you brought up Scott's debate with Bill Kristol from a few years back. And one of my favorite parts of that debate is at one point someone in the audience asks a question to Bill Kristol and says, what's the last US intervention that worked out well? Like, which one is the last one that you can defend? And Bill Kristol, son of Irving Kristol, arch neocon super genius, I think he said the Baltics. Was that right, Scott? Was that the one he
said Bosnia, 95.
Oh, Bosnia. I'm sorry, it was Bosnia. Yeah. So in other words, even Bill Kristol couldn't even begin to attempt to defend Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria or Somalia or Yemen or any of these. And so you can call us isolationists all you want, whatever that means. Like we're arguing, don't fight another stupid war of choice, of aggression. That makes you an isolationist. Meanwhile, what's going on? China's having military parades with Kim Jong-un and the leaders from India and Vladimir Putin and all of them. It seems like the policies of George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Donald Trump have been doing a lot to isolate America. Like,
good
since
point.
when is like dropping bombs on innocent people is what? Bringing us all together? What is that, unifying us? And yet we're the ones that people like me and Scott who are like, hey, just be friends and trade with everybody. Somehow we're cast as the isolationists. The bottom line is that every last one of these wars, and including the war in Ukraine, including the war in, or not, the genocide in Gaza, all of them are just sold off lies and perpetuated off of lies. I mean, we heard for years through all of these things, it's like all the years that they said, we're really building up this Afghan army that's gonna hold the country after we're gone. And we were supposed to recover all Ukrainian territory according to Biden and Nancy Pelosi and all of these things. It's just, and so all that's happening, Anna, as you know well, is that the control of the corporate media has been destroyed. And now people aren't being propagandized in the same way. And so they're seeing through things like nobody has a good response to the stuff that Kurt Mills was saying there. And so all they could do is call you an anti-Semite, or I don't know, maybe they jump on the worst excesses of some conspiracies. And yeah, people get into kooky stuff sometimes on Twitter or whatever, but none of that is really getting at the point, which is that they had control of American foreign policy for many decades. They've completely blown it. They've bankrupted the country and just left millions of corpses of innocent people in the trail to show for it. So people are rejecting that. It really is that simple.
Yeah, and what I'm worried about is, as this anti-war sentiment within the United States grows, I'm seeing more of an effort to engage in censorship, engage in labeling people terrorists in order to punish them for speaking out against the support that we're providing for a genocide in Gaza.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.